The little girl warned her dad about his business partner. What happened next was a nightmare. Hi everyone. Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. I built my company from nothing. 15 years of 70-hour weeks, missed birthdays, sacrificed weekends, and relentless determination transformed a garage startup into a $40 million tech consulting firm. I was smart, disciplined, and ruthlessly logical. I trusted data, not feelings. I relied on contracts, not intuition. I was Michael Chen, and I never made careless mistakes. Except for one. The biggest mistake of my life came wrapped in a 6-year-old's warning that I dismissed as childish imagination. By the time I realized she was right, everything I'd built had turned to ashes, and the only thing left standing was the daughter I'd been too blind to listen to. This is the story of how I lost everything because I didn't trust my little girl, and how she saved me anyway. It started on a Tuesday in September. I remember because Lily had just started first grade, and she was excited about a science project involving plants and sunlight. My ex-wife Rachel had died 3 years earlier in a car accident, leaving me to navigate single fatherhood while running a growing company. I wasn't doing either particularly well. Daniel Morrison was my business partner, co-founder, and the closest thing to a brother I'd ever had. We met in graduate school at MIT, bonded over late-night coding sessions, and shared dreams of entrepreneurship. When I started Chen Morrison Technologies, Dan was the first person I called. We built everything together, 50-50 partners in every sense. Dan was charming where I was reserved, creative where I was analytical. He handled client relationships while I managed operations. It was a perfect partnership. Our employees loved him, our clients trusted him, and I never questioned his loyalty. That Tuesday, I picked Lily up from after-school care later than usual. A client meeting had run long, and by the time I arrived, she was the last child waiting, sitting on a bench with her backpack and her science folder, looking small and alone. "Sorry, sweetheart," I said, buckling her into the car seat. Traffic was terrible. She didn't respond immediately, just stared out the window as I pulled into traffic. Then quietly she said, "Uncle Dan was here today." "At your school?" I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Why?" "He said he had a meeting nearby and wanted to say hi. He talked to my teacher for a long time." "That was nice of him." I smiled, touched that Dan had taken time out of his schedule to check on Lily. "Daddy?" Her voice was small, uncertain. "Yeah, honey? I don't like Uncle Dan." I almost laughed. "What? Why not? Uncle Dan is great. He always brings you presents." "I know, but..." She struggled with the words. "He's not nice." "Not really." "Lily, that's not a kind thing to say. Uncle Dan has been nothing but good to us." "But Daddy, no buts. Uncle Dan is family. You need to be respectful." She fell silent, and I felt a pang of guilt for shutting her down. But she was 6 years old, prone to strange moods and irrational dislikes. Children didn't understand adult relationships, business partnerships, loyalty. I should have listened. 2 weeks later, Dan invited us to dinner at his house. He lived in a sprawling suburban home with his wife Patricia and their twin sons. The evening was pleasant enough, the boys playing video games while the adults talked business over wine. Lily sat at the kids' table, picking at her food and watching Dan with those large, serious eyes that reminded me so much of her mother. "Lily seems quiet tonight," Patricia observed. "First grade is a big adjustment," I said, though I knew that wasn't it. After dinner, Dan pulled me into his study to discuss a new contract. The Meridian Group is interested in a 5-year partnership. "We're talking $30 million, Mike. This could be transformational for us." "That's huge." I studied the preliminary terms he'd printed out. "What's the timeline?" "Fast. They want to move within 60 days. But here's the thing, they want exclusive rights to our proprietary client management system. I know we've been protective of that, but the money, we need to be careful. That system is our competitive advantage. I know. But I've been working on this for months. Trust me, Mike. This is the opportunity we've been waiting for. Trust me, I did trust him completely. That night, as I tucked Lily into bed, she grabbed my hand. Daddy, I heard you talking about money with Uncle Dan. You shouldn't eavesdrop, sweetie. I didn't mean to, but Daddy... He lies. I sighed. Lily, we've talked about this. You can't say things like that about people. But it's true. I saw him at school again. He was talking to someone on his phone, and he was saying bad words about you. Lily, he called you stupid. He said you were stupid and easy. That's enough. My voice came out sharper than I intended. I don't know why you've decided you don't like Uncle Dan, but making up stories isn't okay. Do you understand? Tears welled in her eyes. I'm not making it up. Go to sleep. We'll talk about this tomorrow. But we didn't talk about it tomorrow, or the next day. I was too busy with the Meridian deal, too consumed with contracts and projections. Dan handled most of the negotiations, keeping me updated with regular briefings. Everything seemed perfect. I should have noticed the signs. Dan started coming to the office later and leaving earlier. He took phone calls and closed-door meetings. He asked me to sign documents without fully reviewing them, saying we needed to move fast to maintain momentum. And I signed them, because I trusted him. Lily kept trying to warn me. She drew pictures of Dan surrounded by dollar signs and sad faces. She told me she'd seen him taking papers from my desk when I wasn't there. She said she'd heard him on the phone saying he was going to clean out the company. I dismissed every warning. She was a child. She had an overactive imagination. She was still processing her mother's death and acting out. I was the adult, the educated, experienced businessman. I knew better than a 6-year-old girl. The crash came on a Thursday morning in November. I arrived at the office to find federal agents waiting in the lobby. 2 FBI investigators, a forensic accountant, and a representative from the SEC. They had a warrant to search our premises and seize our financial records. There must be some mistake, I said, my heart racing. We're a legitimate business. We have nothing to hide. Mr. Chen, we have reason to believe that Chen Morrison Technologies has been engaged in fraudulent activity, specifically embezzlement, money laundering, and securities fraud. That's impossible. I manage our books personally. We'd like you to come downtown for questioning. Voluntarily, of course. Dan arrived an hour later, looking appropriately shocked and concerned. We sat together in my office while agents boxed up files and imaged hard drives. This is insane, Dan said. We've done nothing wrong. I know, they won't tell me what they are looking for. We'll get through this. We have the best lawyers. This is just a misunderstanding. But it wasn't a misunderstanding. Over the next 72 hours, the nightmare unfolded piece by piece. The Meridian Group didn't exist. It was a shell company Dan had created to funnel money out of our accounts. The exclusive licensing deal for our client management system was actually a complete transfer of ownership to an offshore entity Dan controlled. The $30 million contract was fake, a fabrication Dan had used to convince me to sign away our intellectual property and grant him access to our capital reserves. But that was just the beginning. Dan had been systematically embezzling from the company for 18 months. He'd created false vendor accounts, submitted fraudulent invoices, and transferred funds to personal accounts hidden behind multiple layers of corporate shells. He'd taken out loans in the company's name and diverted the proceeds. He'd sold client information to competitors. The total, $23 million. Gone. And because I'd signed the documents Dan prepared, because my name was on the accounts, because I was CEO and supposedly oversaw all financial operations, the investigators assumed I was either complicit or criminally negligent. Your partner has disappeared, the lead FBI agent informed me during my third interview. Daniel Morrison hasn't been seen since the day before we executed the search warrant. His wife claims she hasn't heard from him. We've frozen his accounts, but most of the money has already been moved offshore. I didn't know, I said for the 100th time. I trusted him. He was my partner. Mr. Chen, you signed documents authorizing every transaction we're investigating. Either you knew what was happening or you were extraordinarily careless. Either way, you're legally responsible. They released me pending further investigation, but the damage was done. Our clients terminated contracts. Our employees quit or were laid off. Our investors filed lawsuits. The company that took me 15 years to build collapsed in 15 days. I lost everything. The business, our office, my savings, consumed by legal fees, my house, which I'd mortgaged to cover company debts, my reputation, destroyed by media coverage painting me as either a criminal or a fool. The only thing I didn't lose was Lily. My mother took us in, offering her spare bedroom in her small condo across town. Lily had to change schools, leave her friends, adjust to a grandmother she barely knew because I'd been too busy working to maintain family relationships. She never once said, "I told you so." The first night in my mother's apartment, I sat on the floor of the bedroom Lily and I now shared, my head in my hands, trying not to let her hear me cry. She climbed out of bed and sat beside me, putting her small hand on my shoulder. "It's okay, Daddy. We'll be okay." "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I've ruined everything." "You didn't ruin everything. You still have me." I pulled her close. This little girl who deserved so much better than a father, who'd been too arrogant to listen to her, too convinced of his own intelligence to consider that a child might see what an adult missed. "You tried to tell me," I whispered, "about Uncle Dan. You tried to warn me, and I didn't listen." "I know," her voice was matter-of-fact without accusation, "but maybe we can fix it." "Fix it?" "Lily, Uncle Dan stole everything and disappeared. The FBI can't find him. The lawyers say I'm responsible for his crimes. There's nothing to fix." "Maybe not yet, but we can try." Her optimism was heartbreaking. She didn't understand the magnitude of what we'd lost, how completely Dan's betrayal had destroyed us. She was just a little girl who believed her daddy could solve any problem. Except I couldn't. For the first time in my life, I had no solution, no strategy, no way forward. I spent the next month in a fog of legal meetings, depositions, and interviews. The FBI investigation continued, examining every transaction, every decision, every signature. My lawyers tried to build a defense showing I'd been deceived by my partner, but the evidence against me was substantial. I'd signed the documents. I'd authorized the transfers. I'd failed in my fiduciary duty to exercise oversight. "The best we can hope for is a plea agreement," my attorney told me. "Reduced charges in exchange for cooperation, maybe probation instead of prison time." "I didn't commit a crime." "You were negligent, criminally so. Unless we can prove Morrison deliberately deceived you and you had no reason to suspect fraud, you're looking at serious consequences." But I had no proof. Dan had covered his tracks expertly. Every document he'd prepared looked legitimate. Every explanation he'd given seemed reasonable at the time. He'd exploited my trust, my friendship, and my ego. I was defeated, broken, ready to accept whatever punishment the system demanded. That's when Lily saved me. I was sitting at my mother's kitchen table, reviewing bank statements for the 1,000th time, trying to find some evidence of Dan's deception. Lily was at the table too, drawing with colored pencils while I worked. "Daddy, do you remember when we went to Uncle Dan's house for dinner?" "Yeah, honey, why?" "He showed you papers in his office, right?" "That's right." "And you were talking about the big money deal?" I looked at her. "How do you remember that?" "You were playing with the boys." "I wasn't playing. I was listening. The boys were boring." She continued drawing. "Uncle Dan had a safe in his office. A big one, behind the bookshelf. Lots of people have safes. But he opened it when you weren't looking. He took out a phone and made a call. He said," she paused, concentrating. "He said the mark was taking the bait." My blood went cold. "What?" "The mark was taking the bait. I didn't know what it meant, but I remembered because it sounded weird." "When did this happen?" "While you were in the bathroom. He didn't see me. I was behind the door." I stared at my daughter, this extraordinary little girl who'd been paying attention while I'd been obliviously walking into a trap. "Lily, do you remember anything else? Anything at all?" She pushed her drawing toward me. It showed a man at a desk, a safe with phones and papers inside, and numbers written on the safe door. "I saw the combination when he opened it. I drew it so I wouldn't forget." The numbers were there, carefully rendered in a child's handwriting, 184207. "You memorized his safe combination?" "I thought it might be important. Because you always say to pay attention to important things. I had said that, usually when reminding her to do homework or listen to teachers. But somehow she'd applied that lesson in a way that might save us both. Lily, this is incredible, but I can't get into his house. He's gone. And Patricia changed the locks. Can the police get in? Only with a warrant, and they'd need evidence to get a warrant. Lily thought about this, then brightened. What about my drawing? I drew it when we were there. That's evidence, right? She was right. Her drawing was documentation, created in real time, showing suspicious behavior. It wasn't much, but it was something. I called my lawyer immediately. I know this sounds crazy, but I think I have evidence. My daughter witnessed Dan making suspicious phone calls and accessing a hidden safe. She drew a picture of what she saw. There was a long pause. Your 6-year-old daughter? She's very observant, and she tried to tell me about this months ago, but I didn't listen. Mike, I don't know if a child's drawing will be enough. It's more than we had an hour ago. Can you get it to the investigators? He could and did. The FBI was initially skeptical, but Lily's drawing was dated, time-stamped by the metadata on the photo I'd taken of it, proving she'd created it before Dan disappeared. Combined with her testimony about the safe and the combination, it was enough for them to obtain a warrant. They found Patricia cooperative. She'd been as deceived as I was, believing Dan when he said he was protecting assets during a corporate dispute. She let the agents into the house, into Dan's office, and watched as they used Lily's combination to open the safe. Inside, they found 3 phones, a stack of documents, and a portable hard drive containing the evidence that proved everything. Dan had been planning this for years. The phones showed communications with accomplices, offshore bankers, and identity brokers. The documents detailed the shell companies, the false contracts, the systematic theft, and the hard drive contained copies of everything. Every fake invoice, every fraudulent transaction, every lie. But it also contained something more valuable, evidence that Dan had deliberately manipulated me, that he'd forged my signature on some documents, that he'd shown me altered versions of contracts while filing originals that contained different terms. He'd been careful to create a paper trail making me look complicit, but his private records told the truth. I was a victim, not a criminal. The FBI investigation shifted. Instead of treating me as a suspect, they brought me in as a cooperating witness. My lawyers used the evidence to demonstrate that I'd been deceived by a sophisticated fraud. The prosecutors dropped all potential charges against me and focused their resources on finding Dan. It took 4 months, but they found him. He'd fled to the Cayman Islands using a false passport, but Interpol tracked him down and extradited him back to the United States. He was arrested at the airport, handcuffed and defeated, the man who thought he'd planned the perfect crime. Except he hadn't planned for a 6-year-old girl who paid attention. The trial was swift. Dan's own records convicted him. He was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and a dozen other charges. Patricia divorced him before the verdict was announced. The recovery took longer. We traced and froze $13 million of the stolen funds. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. Enough to pay off the company's debts, compensate our former employees, settle with our clients. I didn't rebuild Chen Morrison Technologies. That name, that dream, was tainted by betrayal. Instead, I started something new, something smaller. A consulting firm focused on fraud prevention and financial oversight for small businesses. I hired former FBI forensic accountants. I developed training programs on recognizing internal theft. And I brought Lily to the office every day after school, letting her do homework at a desk in the corner of my office, always within sight. She was 7 now, proud and confident. Her teachers marveled at her maturity, her observational skills, her unusual awareness of adult dynamics. I marveled at her too, this little girl who'd saved her father because she trusted her instincts even when he didn't. One evening, about a year after Dan's conviction, Lily and I sat together in our new apartment, a modest 2-bedroom that was all we could afford but felt like a palace after my mother's spare room. "Daddy," she said, looking up from her math homework. "Yes, sweetheart?" Do you remember when I told you Uncle Dan was bad and you didn't believe me? The question hit like a punch. I remember, and I'm so sorry I didn't listen to you. Why didn't you? I considered lying, making an excuse, but she deserved the truth. Because I thought I was smarter than you. I thought adults understood things better than children. I thought trust and loyalty meant ignoring doubts. But you trust me now? More than anyone in the world. She smiled, satisfied, and returned to her homework. But I couldn't let it go. Lily, how did you know? About Uncle Dan? How did you see what I couldn't? She thought about it, her pencil tapping against her workbook. I watched him. The way he smiled at you was different from the way he smiled at other people. When he smiled at you, it didn't go to his eyes. And he was always watching you, like he was waiting for something. It felt wrong. You saw all that. Kids see lots of things grown-ups don't notice, because you're too busy thinking about important stuff. But sometimes the important stuff is just watching people. She was right. I'd been so focused on contracts and revenue and growth that I'd stopped paying attention to the human element, the subtle cues that signal deception and danger. My 6-year-old daughter had better instincts than an MIT-educated businessman because she'd paid attention to what mattered. You saved us, I told her. If you hadn't remembered that safe combination, if you hadn't drawn that picture, Dan would have gotten away with everything. I might have gone to prison, and we'd have lost everything. I know, she said simply. That's why I had to pay attention, because you needed me to. I pulled her close, this remarkable little human who'd been strong when I was weak, observant when I was blind, brave when I was defeated. I promise you something, I said. From now on, I'll always listen to you. Even if it seems impossible, even if I think I know better. If you tell me something is wrong, I'll believe you. Okay, Daddy. She hugged me back, then pulled away with a serious expression. But you have to promise me something too. Anything. Promise you'll be home for dinner. And not just sometimes. Every night. It was such a simple request, but it carried the weight of years of absence, of being second priority to business deals and client meetings, of having a father who was physically present but emotionally distant. I promise him, I said. Every night. No exceptions. And I kept that promise. For the next 11 years, through middle school and high school, through teenage rebellions and college applications, I was there. Not just physically, but actually present, actually listening, actually engaged. When Lily was 18 and preparing to leave for college, she told me she wanted to study criminology and forensic psychology. I want to help people see what they're missing, she explained. Like how I saw Uncle Dan when you couldn't. You'll be amazing at it, I said, and I meant it. The night before she left for college, we sat together on the couch, looking through old photos. We found pictures from the Chen days, images of me and Dan smiling at company events, arms around each other's shoulders, partners in every sense. Do you ever miss it? Lily asked. The big company, the money, everything you had before. I thought about it honestly. Did I miss the success, the status, the satisfaction of building something impressive? Sometimes. But did I miss the person I'd been, so consumed by ambition that I'd ignored my daughter's warnings until it was almost too late? No, I said. I don't miss it. Because that version of me couldn't see what was right in front of him. He was too busy looking at spreadsheets and contracts to notice that his partner was a liar or that his daughter was trying to save him. You see things now, she said. I do. You taught me how. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat in comfortable silence. Then she said, I'm glad Uncle Dan went to prison. Me too, honey. Not because of revenge or anything, but because if he hadn't stolen everything, you might never have changed. You might have kept working all the time and missing my life. In a weird way, he gave us something better than money. I'd never thought of it that way, but she was right. Dan's betrayal had destroyed my company, but it had forced me to rebuild myself as a father, as a human being. It had taught me to listen to the people who loved me, to trust instincts over spreadsheets, to value relationships over revenue. You're very wise, you know that, I told her. I had a good teacher, she said. But she was wrong. She'd always had that wisdom, that ability to see clearly through the noise and complexity that confused adults. I'd just been too stubborn to learn from her until I had no other choice. Dan Morrison destroyed my company and nearly destroyed my life. But a little girl with colored pencils and an observant eye saved me from complete ruin. She saw the truth when everyone else was blind. She remembered the details when they mattered most. She never gave up on her father, even when he'd failed to listen to her. People ask me sometimes how I rebuilt after losing everything. They want to know my strategy, my business plan, my secret to recovery. The truth is simple. I stopped thinking I had all the answers. I started listening to the people who love me, and I learned that sometimes the smallest voice in the room is the one with the most important message. My daughter warned me about my business partner. I didn't listen. What happened next was a nightmare, but she saved me anyway. And in doing so, she taught me the most valuable lesson I've ever learned. Trust is earned through attention, through consistency, through honesty. And sometimes the person you should trust most is the one you're most tempted to dismiss. I built my first company on logic, analysis, and ruthless efficiency. I built my second company on something stronger. The wisdom of a little girl who taught me that paying attention to people is more important than paying attention to profit. I lost $40 million learning that lesson. But I gained something infinitely more valuable: my daughter's respect, her trust, and a relationship that will last the rest of my life. That's a trade I'd make again without hesitation.